They put me at the kids' table. A plastic chair, a dinosaur on the back of it. They told the whole yard I was slipping. Couldn't manage my own money, they said. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law was 14 months deep into a loan against my own house. A signature that wasn't mine. She held my mail for 3 weeks so a government office couldn't reach me. And every bit of it happened on ground that hadn't belonged to any of them since 2019. 4 years before my husband ever got sick. Because a careful man named Walt Maddox saw exactly who Brooke was, long before the rest of us stopped passing her the potato salad. I did not raise my voice. I never do. My husband used to say I had 2 volumes. Most people only ever heard the quiet one. So I sat in a chair built for a 6-year-old. Cardigan, hands folded on my handbag. I got accurate. Then a Crown Victoria turned onto Live Oak Street, the color of a thundercloud. A man stepped out in an army service uniform. He walked past every grown adult in that yard, past my son, past my daughter-in-law's frozen smile, straight to the dinosaur chair. He came to attention in the grass. 5 words. 5 words that ended Brooke Maddox's whole plan before she understood it had even started. But before the salute, there was a guardianship petition. Before the petition, a Tuesday at the courthouse. And before any of it, a marriage. A man who spent his last years making sure of one thing. If anyone ever tried what Brooke tried, I would already own the ground under my feet. Let me take you back 6 weeks, to a kitchen table in Belton, Texas, and a woman who did not yet know she was already protected. My name is Diane Maddox. I am 72 years old. I did not scream. I did not beg. I have never needed to raise my voice to be believed. I was not about to start over a chair with a dinosaur on it. I live on Live Oak Street in Belton, Bell County, the kind of town built around a courthouse square, a rail line, and a fort that never really left. Fort Cavazos sits big and quiet just south of us. Half the men who mow their own lawns on my street once wore a uniform for it. My house is brick. 1 story. Walt poured the carport himself one August. So hot the concrete cured wrong on the north end. He tore it out and did it again. We planted the pecan trees the year Danny started kindergarten. Whips then. Thin as a finger. Now the big ones drop nuts hard enough to dent a hood. Walt Maddox was my husband for 46 years. A certified public accountant in this county for 31 of them. Careful, quiet, the kind of man who read a document twice before he signed it, and once more after. He died 3 years ago, in our bed, a slow thing in his chest. I held a cup of water he couldn't lift to his own mouth anymore. Before that, in a life I still don't discuss in full, I served 26 years in the United States Army. I don't lead with that. It's easier in this town to be Walt's widow than to be Major General Diane Maddox, retired. The first one asks nothing of anybody. The second one makes men rearrange their faces. So I let them see the cardigan, the reading glasses on their little chain. I let my daughter-in-law tell the neighborhood, gently, for 3 years, that poor Diane never quite got over losing Walt. I let her build that story one soft sentence at a time. I didn't think, not until 11 days before the reunion, that a story like that could be turned into a weapon. Brooke is 41. She married my son Danny 19 years ago. A church 2 counties over. I liked her then. I want that on the record. Quick. Funny. She made Danny laugh in a way I hadn't heard since high school. She threw herself into this family the way some people throw themselves into a new job. Learned everyone's birthday, remembered who took coffee black, showed up at the hospital with a casserole before anyone even called her. For a long time I thought she loved us. I still don't know exactly when that stopped being true, or if it ever fully was, or if a person can love a family and quietly, over years, come to see it as a farm. Danny is 43 now, soft in the middle, the way men get when the job stops being physical. His father's hairline, none of his father's spine, I'm sorry to say. He works logistics for a trucking outfit out on the interstate. Steady money, not big money. Brooke hasn't worked since the twins were small. The twins are 17 now. Here's the first number. Hold on to it. This story runs on numbers, the way Walt taught me every true story does, if you look close enough. 14 months before the reunion, a home equity line of credit got opened against my house. The house on Live Oak Street, $118,000. I didn't open it. I didn't know about it. I wouldn't learn a word of it until 8 days before that reunion. I was sitting in a glass office at a bank on the access road, watching a woman named Teresa go pale. But that comes later. Walt taught me to tell a thing in order, or you don't tell it right. Start with the Tuesday. A Tuesday in May, ordinary as bread. I drove to the Bell County Courthouse to renew the registration on Walt's old truck. I keep it running out of nothing but stubbornness. He loved that truck. I'm not ready to stop loving it either. The line moves slow at that courthouse. I know most of the clerks by name. One of them, Patricia Vance, has worked that counter 22 years. She's known me almost that long. She took my paperwork, typed. Then she stopped typing, looked up over her readers, lowered her voice, the way you lower your voice before you say something that isn't strictly yours to say. "Diane," she said, "I'm probably not supposed to tell you this, but I'd want somebody to tell me. There was a petition on file," she said, "a guardianship petition of the person and the estate, naming me, filed 9 days earlier." She turned her monitor a few degrees so I could see the case number, not the whole file, just the number, black and small on a gray screen. She said the word competency the way you say a word you wish you didn't have to say to a friend. I asked who filed it. She hesitated. Then she told me. Brooke Maddox, petitioner. Consenting co-petitioner, Daniel Maddox. My son. I stood at that counter and felt the floor shift under me. Not a crash, a tilt, the kind you feel in your knees before you feel it anywhere else. I put my hand flat on the cool countertop. I did not raise my voice. I asked Patricia for the cause number. She wrote it on the back of my registration receipt, the pen chained to the counter. Not information she was allowed to hand me on letterhead. Just a kindness, one old friend to another, under the counter. I thanked her. I drove home the speed limit. 41 minutes, 2 long lights. Picture that drive, behind the wheel of your own car, in your own town, learning your son signed a legal document declaring you unfit to run your own life. I did not cry on that drive. I've cried exactly 4 times as an adult. I'll tell you about 2 of them before this is finished. That Tuesday wasn't one of them. That Tuesday, I made a pot of coffee I never drank. I sat at my kitchen table with a 9-digit case number in my own handwriting. I read it until the digits stopped being numbers and started being a sentence. My child had gone to a courthouse and signed a paper saying his mother had lost her mind. A guardianship isn't what people think it is. People hear the word and picture a nursing home. Somebody's grandmother by a window. It's worse than that. Quieter than that. A guardianship is the machinery that takes a grown, competent adult and turns her into a ward. A person other people decide about, instead of a person who decides. Once a court grants it, the guardian signs your name, spends your money, sells your house out from under you, chooses where you live, what you're allowed to know about your own affairs. I spent 26 years making sure other people's worst days were run by someone competent and calm. Now my own family had gone to a judge to argue the someone competent and calm needed a keeper. I did not sleep that night. The next morning I called the clerk's public line. I asked, as a matter of record, for the petition itself. Any named respondent can see it. It took 2 days to arrive. When it did, I sat at my kitchen table and read 4 pages. A stranger, a lawyer named Coleman, had written about me, based entirely on what Brooke told him. Forgetful, it said. Left a stove burner on. I have never once left a stove burner on in my life. I ran pre-flight checklists for a living. I run my kitchen the same way. Unusual and erratic financial decisions, unspecified. My son and daughter-in-law, out of love and concern, believed a limited guardianship was necessary to protect me from exploitation by unknown third parties. Unknown third parties. I read that 4 times. There were no unknown third parties in my life. There was only Brooke, closer to my accounts and my mailbox than any stranger could ever get, writing a document that made her my protector against a danger she alone had invented. I did not call Danny and demand an explanation. I did not call Brooke and scream. I made a list. I've made lists my whole adult life, before missions, before budgets, before funerals. A list saved me here, too. My bank statements had stopped arriving sometime that winter. I'd assumed the post office was slow. A letter I was expecting, connected to matters I don't discuss casually, never came. I assumed it was lost. My cousin Renee had started speaking to me slowly at Easter, the way you speak to someone you've decided can't follow you. I told myself she was tired. My granddaughter Ashley asked, gentle, if I'd been feeling like myself. I told myself she was being sweet. None of it alone would alarm a woman who trusts her family. All of it together, on one page, in my own hand, looked like something else. A campaign. I'd been watching it happen for the better part of a year without once calling it by its name. I called the bank that afternoon, not the branch, the main line. 11 minutes on hold. A song with no words. A young man came on. I asked for the balance on my home equity line. The pause told me everything before he said a word. Ma'am, he said, I'm showing an active line. Balance of $118,412. I asked him to repeat it. He repeated it. I wrote it down, every digit. Under a heading I'd already started calling in my head, the file. I told him I'd never opened a home equity line in my life. On any property, with any bank, ever. He went quiet, the particular quiet of a man who knows his supervisor is about to hear about this call. He asked if I could come into a branch with identification. I told him Thursday morning when the doors opened. I told no one else, except one man, a lawyer named Sam Pruitt. He buried my husband. He'd said maybe 40 words to me in the 3 years since. All of them at funerals. Slow, decent. An office above the hardware store on Main, with a window unit that rattled like it was arguing with itself. I called that afternoon. He said, come Friday. I said Thursday couldn't wait. Something in my voice must have carried, because he said, come this afternoon then. I sat across from Sam Pruitt in an office that smelled like paper and old coffee. I put the petition on his desk. I put the number 118,412 on a sheet beside it. I watched a man who's practiced law in this county 35 years go very still. Diane, he said finally, does Walt's trust ever come up? In anything Danny or Brooke say? I didn't know what he meant. Walt had a will. I read it at the reading, 3 years ago. This same desk. No trust that I knew of. Sam took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, the thing he does when he's deciding how much to say. There's a document I drew up for Walt back in 2019, he said. He asked me to hold it, never discuss it with anyone, including you, unless a specific circumstance arose. He was particular about that. I've honored it 3 years, because the circumstance never came. He looked at me over the glasses. I believe it may have just arrived. I didn't understand. sitting there, exactly what he meant. I only knew my husband, 3 years in the ground, had been planning for a morning like this one since before he ever got sick. And a decent, slow man above a hardware store had been carrying his secret for 3 years, waiting to see if I'd ever need it. Go to the bank Thursday, Sam said. Get the file. Every page. Bring it here. Then, Diane. One more thing. He looked at me over his glasses. Whatever you find at that bank, don't confront Brooke with it yet. Let her keep building whatever she's building. A person who thinks she's still winning makes mistakes. A person who knows she's caught never makes. I drove home that evening, the speed limit, same as always. I didn't sleep much that night either, but it was different than the night before. The night before, I was a woman who didn't understand what was happening to her. That night, I had a plan, and I found, across a long life, that the second kind of night is always easier to survive than the first, no matter how frightened you still are underneath it. Thursday morning, I put on the cardigan, the reading glasses, the handbag, all of it. I'd already decided, without quite admitting it to myself, to let people see exactly what they expected to see a little while longer. I drove to the branch on the access road, between the nail salon and the tax office that only opens in spring. I asked for the manager. Her name was Teresa, about Brooke's age, maybe older. A handshake that had clearly been to a training seminar on handshakes. She took me back to a glass office, 2 chairs, a box of tissues on the desk. The tissues alone were a kind of confession. A bank keeps tissues on hand for conversations it already expects to go badly. I sat down, folded my hands on a plain manila folder I'd brought. I would like to see the complete file on my home equity line, I said. Every page, every signature, and I would like copies of each one before I leave this office today. She did the thing they're trained to do. Warm smile, gentle question. Perhaps my son or daughter-in-law should be here, since they help manage my finances. They do not manage my finances, I told her. That is rather the entire point of my being here. It took 40 minutes and 2 trips out of that room. I sat through all of it without moving, without filling the silence. Silence is a tool. Most people can't bear to sit inside it for long. Eventually, Teresa came back with a stack of paper still warm from the copier. Her seminar smile had gone somewhere else entirely. I read it the way 26 years of reviewing operational files taught me to read anything that matters. Not front to back. Straight to the signature block first. If there's a lie in a document, the lie usually lives in the signature. There it was. A power of attorney, dated the previous January, granting Brooke Maddox authority to act on my behalf. My name at the bottom. My looping D. The little flat tail on the lowercase e a teacher named Mrs. Halloway taught me to make in 1961. I never once stopped making it that way. Close. Someone had studied my handwriting, probably off old checks. A birthday card. But I know my own hand the way I know my own face. This was a drawing of my signature, not my signature. The way a forger's copy of a painting is always a fraction of a second behind the original. Only the person who made the original can feel it. The date underneath was a Tuesday in January. I remembered that Tuesday exactly, the anniversary of the morning Walt died. I spend that day the same way every year. The cemetery off the Killeen Road, 8 in the morning. Then my sister Carol's house in Salado, 40 minutes away, surrounded by witnesses who've watched me grieve on that date 3 years running. I was 2 counties away from that bank. In front of my sister, her husband, 2 of her grown children. At the exact hour this document claimed, I sat in a Belton branch and signed away my own authority. There was a notary stamp, a name I didn't recognize, a commission number. I copied it onto my own sheet, my own pen. Walt taught me a number written down in your own hand becomes a fact you can hold on to. A number you only remember tends to slip. Mrs. Maddox, Teresa said carefully, watching my face the whole time I read. Is everything in order? No, I said, but it is going to be. I want to tell you something about that moment. I think it's the hinge the whole rest of this story turns on. Teresa had been told, I'd learn later, exactly what Brooke told half of Belton. That I was a sweet, slightly confused widow who sometimes needed help with her own paperwork. She watched me read a forged legal instrument the way a woman reads 10,000 documents that mattered more than this one. Something recalculated behind Teresa's eyes. I saw her understand, in real time, that the story she'd been handed didn't match the woman across the desk. I took my copies. I thanked her by name. I drove home the speed limit with a forged power of attorney on the seat beside me. For the first time since Patricia lowered her voice at that counter, I understood the whole shape of what was happening to me. And why. You don't forge a woman's signature to open a six-figure line of credit against her house and simply hope she never notices. You build a second wall behind the first one, in case she does. You file a guardianship petition that quietly primes a judge, a caseworker, a courtroom full of relatives, so that if this woman ever starts asking questions, waving papers, writing down commission numbers, the correct response is sympathy, not alarm, not alarm at what she's found. The forgery was the crime. The guardianship petition was the alibi. Built in advance for the day the crime came to light. And somewhere in all of it, though I didn't know the shape of this piece yet, was a reunion Brooke had already started planning. A reunion that would gather every relative she'd spent the spring quietly coaching, all in one yard, all in one afternoon. So that when she needed a room full of people to nod along and say yes, poor Diane hasn't been herself. The room would already be there, fed, grateful, and hers. It was a good plan. I'll say that plainly because it's true. It took a long time to build. More thought than I would have credited Brooke with before that Tuesday at the courthouse. It had exactly one flaw, and the flaw wasn't anything I'd done. The flaw was a man who'd been dead for 3 years. He'd loved me carefully enough, from further away and for far longer than Brooke Maddox had ever managed to see coming. I drove from the bank straight to Sam Pruitt's office. I put the forged power of attorney on his desk next to the guardianship petition. Sam read both without a word for a long time, the window unit rattling the whole while. All right, he said finally. It's time you knew what Walt left you. I didn't understand what he meant by knew, as though there were something specific waiting for me, something built, not just willed. I asked him plainly. There's a box, Sam said. Downtown, the old bank on Main. Walt set it up in the fall of 2019, same season he came to me about a document he wanted drawn and sealed. He told me if a day ever came when someone tried to take what was his from what was yours, tell me one thing. Go open that box. Nothing else. He was very specific. I not describe the contents. He wanted you to find them yourself. Sam looked at me over his glasses. I think that day is today, Diane. I drove downtown that same afternoon, past the courthouse square, past the old rail depot, to the bank with the high ceilings and marble worn into a soft dip from 100 years of shoes. I signed the little card. A young man walked me back to a room with a long table, left me alone with a steel box I hadn't opened since the year my husband died. No reason to. I had his will. I had the house, or thought I did. Grief enough that the box had felt for 3 years like a chore I'd get to eventually. I lifted the lid. Walt's handwriting was everywhere inside it. Old pencil notes, the soft folded title to a boat we sold in 1998, so exactly like him to have kept. Our marriage license, gone soft at the folds, and underneath all of it, a flat manila envelope, sealed. My name across the front, block printing, the printing he used only for things that mattered. Diane, underlined once. I opened it with my thumb, right there at the long table. The marble made the tearing sound louder than it was, the way empty rooms do. Two things inside. A document with a blue backing, thick, official, recorded, and a single sheet in Walt's own hand. I read the document first. I'm my husband's wife. You read the instrument before the feeling, or the feeling gets in the way of reading it straight. A trust. The Maddox Family Trust. Established and recorded in Bell County, fall of 2019, 4 years before Walt got sick. Back when he was still strong, still driving himself to the hardware store, still arguing with the men at the smoker about a football season none of them had played in for 30 years. Into that trust, by a deed recorded at the courthouse, clerk's stamp and all, volume and page number right there on the page. Walt had placed the house inside it, our house, the brick on Live Oak Street, the carport with the bad north end, the pecan trees we planted as whips. The house didn't belong to Diane Maddox, the person. It belonged to the Maddox Family Trust, and the trustee, sole and exclusive, the only living soul with legal authority to borrow against that house, sell it, or pledge it as collateral. Named in plain language on the third page, language no judge in Texas could read past. Diane Maddox, trustee. Not Danny, not Brooke, not any power of attorney, real or forged, because a power of attorney only lets you act for the owner. And the owner hadn't been a person since 2019. The owner was a trust. You cannot mortgage a house you don't own, whatever signature you put on the paperwork. Brooke had pledged collateral that had never been hers to pledge, never mine to pledge either. Not for 4 years. She'd built her entire plan on a floor that wasn't there. Her false bottom had a false bottom underneath it. Walt built the second one in absolute quiet, years before he needed it. He'd watched Brooke closely enough, long enough, to know exactly what kind of morning this would be. Then I read the letter. I won't give you every word. Some of it belongs only to me. But the part that matters, the part I've read so many times, said this. The fold has gone soft now, the way our marriage license went soft. The house was always yours, Di. I made sure. If you're reading this, somebody tried something, and I'm sorry I couldn't be there to stand beside you. But you never needed me standing beside you. You needed me to get out of the way and let you be accurate. So go be accurate. Signed, simply Walt, no flourish. A man who never once needed anyone to be told his rank. I sat in that marble room a long moment. I did not cry, though I'd earned one, and nobody would have seen it if I had. I put the trust back in its blue backing, folded the letter along its own soft seam, drove, the speed limit, straight back to the office above the hardware store. Sam read the trust for the second time in his life, 20 minutes without a sound, the way a man reads a document he wrote himself but hasn't seen in years. Then he took off his glasses and looked at me the way he hadn't looked at me in 3 years of brief, funeral-length conversations. Diane, he said, do they know about this trust? No, I told him. Nobody knew. Not even me. Not fully until this afternoon. And the guardianship hearing. Do you have a date? 3 weeks out, I said. And Brooke is throwing a family reunion this Saturday. At my house. I understand I'm to be the guest of honor, in a manner of speaking. He was quiet a long moment, the window unit rattling on. Then Sam did something I'd genuinely never once seen him do, which was smile, small, at just one corner of his mouth. She's gathering her witnesses, he said. She is, in one place, on the property. with the deed to that same property recorded across the street the whole time. He put his glasses back on. Slow. Diane, I've practiced law in this county 35 years. I have never had the evidence, the witnesses, and the wrongdoer all assemble themselves voluntarily in one backyard on a Saturday afternoon. If a man wrote a case that way, I'd tell him it was too neat to trust. Walt used to say the same thing about my plans. I told him. Too neat. And then they worked anyway. We spent that week building what Sam called the record and what I, from a different life, would have called the file. Not so different. Building a case and preparing an operation. You gather every fact. Confirm it twice. You don't move until the facts are load-bearing on their own, without you standing under them, holding them up by hand. Sam pulled the recorded deed from the courthouse himself. Certified copy. The trust's name sitting right there in the county's own ink. Dated 2019. 4 years ahead of any forged power of attorney Brooke could produce. He tracked down the notary commission number I'd copied off the forged document. Made one phone call. Told me afterward the man on the other end went, in Sam's words, the color of paste, because that notary had never once met me, never watched me sign a thing in his life, and was about to learn what his commission was worth in a state investigation. Sam drafted 3 letters that week, one to the bank, one to family court, one to an office of the federal government. I'll let explain itself in its own time. There was a second file building that same week. One Sam and I had nothing to do with. One I wouldn't fully understand until the afternoon a Crown Victoria turned onto my street. For 3 weeks, an office a long way from Belton had been trying to reach me. Letters with a federal seal, certified, sent to my address on Live Oak Street. Connected to a life I don't discuss casually. A life that put my old rank beside my name on paperwork that doesn't go quiet for long when nobody answers it. Walt knew about that part of my life in full. Brooke didn't know the first thing about it. And those letters, every single one, had been arriving at a mailbox Brooke Maddox passed on foot nearly every day. Because 3 years earlier, kindly, exhausted with grief, I'd given my overwhelmed, generous daughter-in-law a key to help me with my own mail while I grieved my husband. I didn't know yet, sitting in Sam's office that week, why those letters never reached me. I wouldn't know the full shape of it until the afternoon itself. I only knew, the way you know weather is coming before the sky changes, that something else was moving toward that Saturday too, on its own schedule, for its own reasons. And when an office like that can't raise a person of my former rank for 3 straight weeks, it doesn't just give up. It sends someone to find her in person. Sam asked, near the end of that week, how I wanted to handle the actual moment. Once every document was certified, every letter drafted, he meant it as a legal question. File quietly, resolve it through counsel, avoid any public spectacle at all, which is, he told me honestly, what most of his clients in my position would choose. A courtroom is slow, exhausting, rarely satisfying even when you win it clean. I told him no. I didn't want a courtroom first. A courtroom is exactly the kind of quiet, procedural room where Brooke had planned to finish me. A judge who'd never met me. A guardian ad litem reading a stranger's summary of my supposed decline. Me not even required to be present for most of it. I wanted this handled in the one place Brooke herself had chosen to stage her whole campaign. In the yard, under the pecans, in front of every cousin she'd coached, every relative whose elbow she'd touched all spring long, telling them gently that poor Diane wasn't herself anymore. That's not strictly necessary from a legal standpoint, Sam said carefully. Necessary and right are 2 different words, I told him. I've spent my whole career choosing the right one when I could afford to. I believe I can afford to now. Sam didn't argue with me again after that. He's known me in his slow and careful way for 35 years, mostly at a distance, mostly through Walt. I think somewhere in that week he remembered, or maybe learned for the first time, exactly what kind of woman his old friend had married. On the Wednesday before the reunion, I drove out to Fort Cavazos myself, to an office I still, after all these years, know how to find without a map. I made one phone call from a hallway I used to walk in a different uniform entirely. Truth is, I didn't call to ask for help. I don't believe in calling in favors to fight a family fight. That felt, to me, like using a howitzer on a garden fence. I called because there was a genuine matter connected to my old file, a piece of unfinished business from a career that doesn't fully close just because a person retires from it. And that matter, entirely on its own, entirely without my asking, had already generated 3 weeks of unanswered certified letters to an address where my daughter-in-law controlled the mailbox key. I didn't know, walking out of that building, what was coming. That the timing of my old life's business and the timing of Brooke's reunion were about to collide in a single yard. I don't believe in fate, particularly. Walt didn't either. He believed in preparation meeting opportunity. He would have said, if he'd lived to see that Saturday, that it was simply two people 3 years apart, both quietly doing their jobs. By Friday night, I had everything Sam needed sitting in one folder on my kitchen table. The trust, the recorded deed, the forged power of attorney, and the notary's commission number. The bank statements showing a balance of $118,412. The wire records Sam had subpoenaed, showing where a good part of that money actually went. A new truck for Danny, $4,000 in landscaping for their own home, 2 streets over, a deposit, $11,000, to a company called Bluebonnet Events and Catering, a name I'd hear again very soon, printed on the side of a rented tent. I sat at that table a long time Friday night, looking at that folder. I thought about Walt, about the reunion he'd never see, about a sentence he used to say to young officers under his breath when a decision had gone soft somewhere up the chain. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. I'd been slow for 11 days. I intended, on Saturday, to be exactly as smooth as I'd been slow. There is one more piece of that week I have not told you. It belongs here, before Saturday. It is the piece that taught me exactly how far Brooke had already gone. On the Thursday before the reunion, Sam called me with something he had found in the county's own public records. Not hidden, not clever, sitting in plain sight, the way the truest damning facts often do. 8 months earlier, Brooke had filed papers to form a small event planning company, Bluebonnet Events and Catering, the same name I would later see painted on the side of a rented tent. She was not merely paying a caterer for the reunion. She owned the caterer. Every dollar of that home equity line that moved through Bluebonnet's account moved, in some part, back into her own pocket, dressed up as a vendor invoice. I sat at my kitchen table with that fact for a long time. I want to tell you honestly what I felt, because it was not shock. By that Thursday, I no longer had room left in me for shock. What I felt was a kind of cold recognition, the way you recognize a pattern you have seen before in a different uniform. Walt used to say that people rarely invent a new kind of dishonesty. They simply borrow the shape of the last one that worked. Brooke had borrowed the shape of a woman managing a helpless relative's money for the relative's own good. She dressed every theft inside that shape so carefully that even Danny, sleeping beside her every night, never once saw the seams. Sam drove out to the house that same evening, the incorporation papers in his portfolio. We sat at my kitchen table, the bank sheets, the trust, the forged power of attorney, and now Bluebonnet's filing, spread in a row like cards. He tapped the bluebonnet paper twice with one finger. "This is the piece that turns a family dispute into fraud," he said. "A daughter-in-law spending grocery money carelessly, a court might forgive. A daughter-in-law borrowing 6 figures against her mother-in-law's house and routing a chunk of it into a company she secretly owns. No court forgives that. Not once a judge sees it laid out." "Does the judge need to see it Saturday?" I asked. "The judge does not need to see it at all if you don't want him to," Sam said. "You could end this with paperwork alone, quietly. No yard, no witnesses, no colonel." I thought about that for a long moment, sitting at my own table. In the house Walt built for me, before either of us knew a woman like Brooke would ever walk through its door. I thought about the dinosaur chair I had not yet sat in, the one I already knew from a phone call with Brooke that same week, was waiting for me under the pecan tree. I thought about 40 relatives who had spent a year hearing, in small, careful doses, that I was fading. "They get to watch me stand up," I told Sam. "Every one of them. Quiet was never going to teach this family anything. They need to see it happen, or they'll spend the rest of their lives telling each other a softer version." Sam nodded slowly, the way he does when he has stopped arguing a point because he has come to agree with it. "Then we do it your way," he said. "But Diane, I want you prepared for one thing. A woman cornered in front of 40 witnesses does not always go quietly. Brooke may fight harder in that yard than she would in any courtroom, because a courtroom has no audience for her to perform for." "I am counting on that," I said. He looked at me for a long moment over his glasses. Something in his face reminded me, briefly and painfully, of Walt. The exact look my husband gave me, across this same table. The look he had whenever he remembered he had married a woman who did not flinch from a righteous fight. "Walt told me once," Sam said, "that the day you finally got angry about something, the something had better be worth it." I believe he would say this qualifies. I drove out to Fort Cavazos again that Friday, one last visit before the reunion. Not for the Meridian matter this time, just to walk the old grounds alone for an hour, the way I do a few times a year, when I need to remember who I was, before this town made me only a cardigan and a casserole dish. I stood at the edge of the old parade field where I once stood in formation as a young lieutenant, decades before Belton knew my name at all. I thought about the particular arithmetic of a life: 26 years in uniform, 19 years watching my daughter-in-law learn this family's rhythms, 3 years grieving a husband who had, it turned out, never once stopped protecting me. Not even from the far side of the ground he was buried in. I drove home that evening, ready for whatever Saturday intended to bring me. I had already decided, standing on that empty parade field, something plain. I had spent a career being underestimated by people who mistook composure for weakness. Brooke Maddox, however clever she believed herself, was about to become the last person to make that mistake in front of an audience. Saturday morning I woke early, the way I always do. I put on a cardigan, clipped my reading glasses to their little gold chain, looked at myself in the mirror a long moment before I left the house. I did not look like a woman about to end anything. I looked like Walt's widow. I looked exactly like what Brooke needed me to look like. Right up until the moment I no longer needed to. I drove the half-mile to my own house. Brooke had insisted weeks earlier on picking me up herself to make it easier, she said. I let her. Sam had told me more than once that week, a simple thing. A woman who thinks she's still managing you hasn't realized yet how much she's lost. She arrived at 9:45, a car I didn't recognize, newer than the one she drove at Christmas. She came up my walk in a sundress the color of butter, already dressed for a party that wouldn't start for 3 more hours. She hugged me at my own front door, the way she's hugged me for 19 years. Warm, quick, practiced. "You look wonderful, Diane," she said. "Are you ready for today?" "I believe I am," I told her. And for the first time in 19 years, I meant something entirely different by those words than she understood. She drove us to my own house, chatting the whole way. The caterer, a company out of Temple. How much everyone would love the brisket. I sat in the passenger seat of a car she bought with money drawn against my own collateral, and I let her talk. I've sat through longer, harder silences than a 10-minute drive. Briefing rooms waiting on casualty numbers. A woman's chatter about brisket was not going to break my composure. We pulled into the driveway, and the transformation of my own backyard stopped me for a moment. A rented tent, white, 20 by 30 feet, the kind that goes up on aluminum poles and takes 2 men most of a morning. 40-some folding chairs, the good gray kind, not the mismatched ones we always used, set in careful rows. A caterer's truck backed up to the side gate, Blue-Bonnet Events and Catering painted in cheerful cursive on the panel. 2 young men in black aprons already unloading chafing dishes. A bar table, a hired bartender polishing glasses that didn't need polishing, and, unmistakably, a photographer. A young woman with 2 cameras around her neck, testing her light meter against the morning sun. Last year, this same reunion had been Brooke's idea, too. She'd run the whole thing herself off 2 folding card tables and grocery store foil trays. She told every relative, twice each, how much money she'd saved doing it herself. I remembered that reunion clearly. I'd complimented her on the potato salad, and she beamed for a week. This year, my rough count, standing in my own driveway, doing the arithmetic Walt taught me. It put the day somewhere north of $2,000. Tent, chairs, catering, a hired photographer. For a family that had spent the entire spring telling one another, telling me, that we were all just scraping by. A strange bill for a woman claiming poverty to run up in a single Saturday. I filed it, mentally, in the folder with everything else. I let Brooke walk me across my own lawn, to the pecan tree at the back, near the fence line, away from the tent, the bar, the good gray chairs. There was a chair waiting for me there, a child's folding chair, plastic, a green dinosaur molded into the backrest, the kind you buy for a 6-year-old's birthday. 2 little cousins already sat near it with paper cups of red punch. A cousin's boy peeled the label off a juice bottle at a low table beside it, set with paper plates and crayons. "There you go," Brooke said, guiding me down into it with a hand on my shoulder. Gentle, public, performative, in a way I hadn't let myself see clearly until that exact moment. Comfy. "We didn't want you way out there in the sun with your hip. There is nothing wrong with my hip. I've never once complained about my hip, in 19 years, to Brooke or to anyone. I walk 4 miles most mornings, the same 4 miles I've walked for a decade, past the church and back along the rail spur. But I looked at my daughter-in-law's face, warm, concerned, utterly convinced of her own kindness, and I understood all at once that she believed her own story. That's a specific kind of danger. A person who's told a lie so many times, to so many people, she's come to live inside it like a house, no longer aware of the walls at all. I sat down in the dinosaur chair, 72 years old, in a life that's put me in worse places than a plastic chair on a warm Saturday. I put my handbag in my lap, folded my hands on top of it, said nothing. That's the part people never expect. The nothing. My husband used to say I had 2 volumes. Most people only ever heard the quiet one. In 19 years of marriage to my son, Brooke had apparently never once needed to hear the other. So I sat, and I got accurate. I clocked the spread first. 2 full chafing pans I didn't recognize from any prior year. Sterno cans burning blue underneath. The rental chairs, $8 a day apiece, from the yard out on Loop 121. Walt and I rented chairs from that same yard for his retirement party a decade ago. The tent alone, that size, ran close to $400 for the day, delivered and struck. The photographer, if she was even being paid and not simply a favor, ran anywhere from 300 to 6. None of it alone would alarm a stranger. All of it together, on a woman who'd spent the spring quietly telling relatives the family was struggling. Danny's hours cut, things tight. It looked like something else entirely. It looked like a woman spending someone else's money to stage a very convincing performance of struggle. The yard filled up through the late morning the way these things do. Cars parking nose to tail along my own curb. Cousins, second cousins, in-laws I see twice a year. Children running the fence line. A speaker somewhere playing old country, the kind Walt liked. Men gathered around the smoker, the one he built himself out of a repurposed propane tank 15 years ago, arguing about a football season none of them had actually played in. The pecans, heavy and green overhead, dropped now and then onto the tent canvas with a small knock. Every time one fell, a child shrieked with delight, like the sky itself was coming down. Somewhere behind me, a man laughed too loud at his own joke. The whole afternoon smelled like mesquite smoke and cut grass and the sweet chemical red of children's punch. It was my house. Hold on to that. The brick under that tent. The carport with the bad north end. The pecan trees we planted as whips the year Danny started kindergarten. 41 years of my life on this half-acre, a half-mile from the railroad. Fort Cavazos, sitting big and quiet just south of town, the way it always has. I built this house with Walt Maddox, with our own hands, our own decisions, our own money. To every soul on that street, for 3 years, I'd been simply Walt's widow, as though the man had taken the rest of me with him into the ground, as though what remained was a cardigan and a casserole dish someone eventually needed to collect. Danny came across the grass not long after I sat down, a beer already sweating in his hand, though it wasn't yet noon. He couldn't quite look at me with both eyes at once. "You doing okay over here, Mom?" "I'm fine, Danny. Brooke just thought, with the sun and everything, you're hip." "Tell Brooke I appreciate the thought," I said, and let it go. I was watching a man repeat a sentence someone else handed him. No profit yet in making him carry the weight of it in front of 40 relatives. He nodded too quickly and drifted back toward the smoker, the men, the noise, visibly relieved to be released. I watched him go. That's the thing I keep returning to, even now, months later, with all of it settled. Not the chair, my son, a man who'd signed his own mother's name to a document declaring her incompetent, standing 40 feet away, drinking a beer, unable to hold my eyes for longer than a breath. Brooke worked that yard the entire late morning. I'll give credit where it belongs. Walt taught me even your enemy's competence is a fact, not an insult. She touched every elbow, refilled cups before anyone asked, crouched down at the children's level to admire a scraped knee, a new toy, laughed warm and easy at every mediocre joke the men told around the smoker. She was, to every single person on that lawn, the exhausted, devoted daughter-in-law, giving up her whole Saturday, no small part of her own tight budget, to take such loving care of poor, confused Diane. She wore that butter-yellow sundress. She'd done something new and careful with her hair. Twice over the course of that late morning, I watched her glance toward the side yard, toward the street, toward Live Oak itself, the way you glance at a door when you're expecting someone and haven't told anyone else that you are. I didn't yet know who she was watching the street for. I assumed a delivery. Nerves. a hostess checking her own production one more time. I did not know the person coming down that street that afternoon was coming for me, had been trying to reach me for the better part of 3 weeks, had been unable to, for a reason that was, at that exact moment, standing 40 feet away, in a sundress, laughing at a joke about high school football. Mid-morning, my sister Carol found me under the pecan tree. She pulled a real chair over from the nearest adult table. She ignored the dinosaur seat entirely. She sat beside me without asking. Carol is younger than me by 4 years, sharper than most people give her credit for. She has never once in her life needed Brooke's approval for anything. "This is insulting," Carol said, low, glancing at the little chair. "You know that. I know exactly what it is," I told her. "Then why are you sitting in it?" I did not answer that directly. I could not yet, not without giving away more than the moment could afford. I only told her, "Sit with me a while, Carol. Just sit." She did. We watched the yard together a long stretch. Carol misses very little. She pointed her chin toward the side gate. "She keeps checking that street," Carol said. "Fourth time in 20 minutes. "I've noticed," I said. "Waiting on someone, so it would seem." Carol studied my face a moment, the look my sister gives me when she suspects I know more than I'm saying. A look she's been giving me since we were girls, sharing one bedroom in our parents' house outside Salado. "Diane, what are you not telling me?" "Nothing you need to carry today," I said. "Only watch. That's all I'm asking." She did not push further. Carol has always trusted my silences more than most people trust my words. I have loved her for that trust across every hard year of my life, including the ones I could not describe to her at the time. While Carol sat with me, I watched Brooke work a knot of cousins near the dessert table, Renee among them, and I watched something that confirmed a suspicion I'd been carrying since Easter. Brooke leaned in close to Renee, said something low I couldn't hear from that distance. Renee nodded twice, quick, the nod of a person receiving instructions, not conversation. A minute later, Renee drifted toward my chair. She knelt down to my eye level, the way you kneel to speak to a small child. "Aunt Diane, are you comfortable? Do you need anything?" "I am perfectly comfortable, Renee," I said, at my own normal pace. It seemed, from the flicker in her eyes, to unsettle her slightly. "Thank you for asking." She patted my knee, the way you pat a knee you've been told belongs to someone fragile. She moved off again. I understood, watching her go, that Brooke had spent the morning deploying small soldiers across that yard. One gentle, rehearsed kindness at a time, each one a data point Brooke could later cite. She checked on Diane herself multiple times, very concerned about her decline. I did not blame Renee for it, not fully. Renee did not know she was being used as a witness for a story that was not true. I blamed the woman doing the deploying. Around 11:30, Danny's old high school friend Mark came by to say hello. A heavy-set man I'd known since he was a boy, trailing my son through this same yard 3 decades ago. He made a mistake, kindly meant. He raised his voice slightly, spoke with exaggerated care, the way people do around someone they've been told cannot follow a normal conversation. "Mrs. Maddox, you're looking well today. You doing okay out here?" "I'm doing very well, Mark," I said, matching his volume, then dropping back to my own. "And you can speak to me at your normal volume. My hearing is excellent. It's my daughter-in-law's honesty that's in question, not my ears." Mark blinked, caught somewhere between a laugh and a flinch. Carol, beside me, pressed her lips together hard to keep from grinning outright. "Was that too much?" I asked her once Mark had wandered off, uncertain, toward the smoker. "No," Carol said. "That was exactly enough. Save the rest." I intended to. It was somewhere in that stretch of the late morning that I understood something about my own life. Watching Brooke work the yard, from a chair built for a child, something I hadn't fully understood before. Not even in the 11 days since Patricia Vance lowered her voice at the courthouse counter. I had spent 26 years being the calm, competent officer other people leaned on in their worst hours, the one who kept her composure when younger soldiers came apart, the one commanders trusted to deliver hard news without flinching. I had spent the 3 years since Walt died letting this town fold me quietly into a smaller shape. Walt's widow, a shape that asked nothing of me, and, I now understood, had cost me something I hadn't noticed losing. My own family had come to believe the smaller shape was all that remained. Sitting under that pecan tree, in a chair meant for a 6-year-old, surrounded by people who thought they already knew how much of me was left. I felt something old and familiar settle back into my spine. Not anger, readiness. The specific, steady readiness I used to feel standing at the front of a briefing room before delivering news no one wanted to hear. Carol must have felt some of it too. Sitting beside me, she reached over at one point and took my hand. Just briefly, the way she used to when we were girls, and something in the house had gone wrong that neither of us could yet name aloud. She did not ask again what I wasn't telling her. She simply held my hand a moment, then let it go. "Whatever it is," she said quietly, "I'm glad I'm here for it." "So am I, Carol," I told her. "Stay close this afternoon." She looked at me a long moment. Something in my face must have finally told her more than my words had. She nodded once, slow. She settled back into her chair beside mine. She did not ask me anything else for the rest of that long, waiting morning. I want to tell you, before the sedan comes down that street, exactly what 26 years actually looked like. I have mentioned my service in pieces so far. A life like that deserves better than pieces. I enlisted at 22, the year after Walt and I married. Over his mild objection and his complete support, both at once, which was always the particular gift of that man. I went in as a lieutenant through officer candidate school. I made captain by 28. I made major at 34, the same year Danny was born. I remember holding him in a hospital in Georgia, my new gold oak leaf still pinned to a uniform hanging in the closet. Two entirely separate kinds of pride, living in one chest, without crowding each other out. I served 2 tours overseas. I do not describe them in detail to people in Belton, not because the details are shameful, because they are not this town's to carry. I made lieutenant colonel at 41, full colonel at 47. I was selected for brigadier general at 53, the first star, major general at 57, the second, 2 stars on each shoulder by the time I was 58 years old. Overseeing logistics and readiness for a command most people in this county have never heard the name of, and never will, from me. I retired at 62, the year before Walt's diagnosis. I want to tell you honestly, I did not retire because I was tired of the work. I retired because Walt asked me to come home, while we still had healthy years left to spend together. I have never once regretted giving him that. Not even now. Not even sitting in a dinosaur chair, served brisket cut up like baby food. By a woman who had no idea what those 36 years had built. I received the Legion of Merit twice in my career. I received a Bronze Star with a combat distinguishing device. I do not discuss it at dinner tables, ever. Some things are not conversation. They are simply weight a person carries quietly for the rest of her life. I trained, over those 26 years, by my own rough count, somewhere near 4,000 officers. They passed through commands I ran, or courses I taught. I like to think a fair number are still out there somewhere, running their own commands, using some fragment of what I taught them without remembering exactly where they learned it. None of that mattered to Brooke. It is possible she genuinely did not know most of it. Walt and I did not parade my record through family dinners. We were, both of us, private people about the things that mattered most. I think now that our privacy, meant as dignity, was read by my own daughter-in-law as absence. If there is nothing visible to respect, a certain kind of person concludes there is nothing there at all. Brooke looked at a quiet, cardiganed widow in her 70s. She saw exactly what she expected to see. I had, without ever intending it as a trap, given her nothing else to look at. I thought about all of this sitting under the pecan tree that morning, watching my family orbit around a story that was not true. I found, to my own mild surprise, that I did not feel bitter about the years of quiet. I had chosen that quiet. I had chosen Walt, this house, this town, the version of myself that let a whole community believe I was simply his widow, because that version let me grieve him in peace. Without the complications my old rank tends to bring into any room it enters, what I felt instead was something closer to a soldier's patience. The specific, trained patience of a person who has learned the moment to act is not the moment the insult lands. The moment to act is the moment you have gathered everything you need, not 1 second before. I had gathered everything I needed by that Saturday morning: the trust, the forged power of attorney, the bank's own file, the blue bonnet papers, a lawyer who had quietly loved my late husband enough to keep a decade-old promise. And somewhere out on the interstate, though I did not know the hour yet, a man in dress blues was driving toward Belton, 3 weeks of unanswered certified letters in a leather folder under his arm, entirely unaware that his errand and my reckoning were about to arrive at the same address, within the same hour. Carol touched my arm once more before Brooke came by with the brisket. "You've gone somewhere else," she said. "I can always tell." I was remembering some things, I told her. Old things, nothing that needs worrying over. Good things or hard things? Both, I said. The way most of the truest ones are. Carol has known me longer than anyone left alive, except Sam Pruitt. She nodded once and let the subject rest. She has always understood, better than almost anyone in this family, that some of my silences are simply silences, and some of them are loaded. She has never once needed me to specify which, before deciding to trust me anyway. Around 1 o'clock, Brooke came by my chair, one of the young men in black aprons trailing behind her with a tray. She set a paper plate down on the low children's table in front of me. Brisket cut into small pieces, the way you cut meat for a toddler or a person who can no longer be trusted with a knife. "I cut it up small for you, Diane," she said, pitched just loud enough to carry to the nearest table. "I know it's hard for you to manage sometimes." She said it the way you announce the weather. Mild, sympathetic, a little sorry on my behalf. Then she straightened and moved on. "3 relatives near me gave me the same soft, pitying look you give a dog that's gotten old, the kind that can no longer make the stairs on its own." I looked down at my brisket, cut small. My own meat, smoked years ago by my own husband's recipe, on a smoker he welded together himself, in the yard of a house I owned in a way not one of them understood. I want to tell you honestly what I felt, because it wasn't what you'd expect. It wasn't rage. It was a cold, clean, almost restful clarity. The specific feeling I used to get an hour before a difficult operation. All the extraneous noise drops away. What's left is the task in front of you, and the plain question of whether you're equal to it. I picked up the plastic fork, ate one piece of the brisket. Good. Despite everything, Brooke had paid a caterer with my own money to reproduce my late husband's smoked brisket recipe, even diminished, even cut small and served to me like a child. It was still good. Some things survive the people who try to use them against you. Not long after Brooke set that plate of cut-up brisket in front of me, my brother-in-law Gary wandered over from the smoker. He wiped his hands on a dish towel. He pulled a chair around backward to sit on it, the way men do at outdoor parties, arms folded over the backrest. Gary is Walt's late brother's son, technically a nephew rather than a brother-in-law. The family has called him that so long the correction stopped mattering years ago. He is a good-natured man, not sharp the way Carol is sharp, but decent. And decent counts for something, even when it is slow to notice trouble. "Diane," he said, "Brooke tells me you've been having some rough days lately. Memory stuff." He said it kindly, the way you'd mention someone's bad knee. "I'm real sorry to hear it. Who told you that, Gary?" "Brooke, mostly. And Danny, some." He scratched the back of his neck. "Said you'd been getting confused about bills and appointments and such. Said it's been hard on both of them, watching it happen." I looked at Gary a long moment. I made a decision, sitting in that low chair, about how much to give him. Not the whole of it. Not yet. Only enough to plant a seed that would matter later, when he stood as a witness to what came next. "Gary," I said, "have I ever once in your entire life struck you as a confused woman?" He thought about it honestly, which I respected. Gary does not flatter people reflexively, the way some in this family do. "No," he said slowly. "Can't say you have. You're the one who caught the accountant shorting the church roof fund 3 years running. Everybody still talks about that." "I did catch that," I said, with arithmetic, in my head, at 70 years old. "I remember," Gary said. Something shifted in his face, a small crack of doubt, working its way into a story he'd accepted secondhand, without ever testing it against his own memory of me. "Huh," he said. "Never thought about that next to what Brooke's been saying. Think about it a little more today, Gary," I told him. "That's all I'll ask of you." He nodded, slow, clearly turning something over. He wandered back toward the smoker with his dish towel. I watched Carol watching the whole exchange, 2 feet away. She gave me the smallest approving nod, the kind you give a fellow soldier who has just placed a charge exactly where it needs to sit. A few minutes later, Brooke's own mother came and sat briefly in the chair Carol had vacated to refill her tea. Pauline, a thin, anxious woman who drives in from Killeen for these things, and rarely says much. Pauline has always been kind to me, in a quiet, sideways fashion. The kindness of a woman who has spent her whole life a little afraid of her own daughter's temper. She has learned to express affection in small, safe gestures instead of direct ones. "You look tired, Diane," Pauline said, patting my hand. "Brooke works so hard for this family. I hope you know that." "I know she works hard, Pauline," I said. True. And meant in that moment, entirely as an indictment rather than a compliment, though Pauline heard only the surface of it. "She's always been like that," Pauline said, fond, a little sad around the eyes in a way I hadn't noticed on her before. Even as a girl, had to control everything. I used to worry it would get her into trouble someday. All that managing. She laughed, small, uneasy, as if she'd said more than she meant to. "Listen to me," running my mouth. "You didn't need to hear an old woman's worries. I'm an old woman myself, Pauline," I said. "I don't mind hearing them." She patted my hand once more and drifted off to find her tea. I sat with what she'd said a long moment. It was the first crack of daylight anyone in that yard had shown me all morning. Brooke's own mother, of all people, had quietly worried about this exact shape of her daughter for years, long before any of us had the evidence in front of us to worry properly. The morning wore on that way, in small pieces, each one a stone I set carefully into a wall I was building. Most of that yard did not realize a wall was under construction at all. A word here to Gary, a held silence there with Pauline. Carol beside me the whole time, watching, saying little, understanding more with every passing hour that something was coming, even without the shape of it yet. At noon, Danny came by my chair a second time, this time without a beer in his hand. He crouched down in front of me, the way you crouch to speak to someone at eye level when you actually mean it. Not the way Renee had knelt earlier, performing gentleness for an audience. "Mom," he said, "are you really doing okay? I mean it this time." I looked at my son a long moment. Something softened in me despite everything. Underneath the beer and the soft middle and the year of cowardice, there was still, somewhere, a boy I remembered. The one who used to bring me dandelions from this same yard when he was 6 years old. He'd tell me they were roses. I never once corrected him. A boy's love does not need correcting, only receiving. "I am about to be, Danny," I told him, "more than you know yet." He frowned, uncertain, sensing something in my tone he couldn't name. Before he could ask me to explain it, Brooke called his name sharply from across the yard. Some errand about ice. He rose, reluctant, and went to her, glancing back at me once, over his shoulder. Some small part of him had already begun, without knowing why, to worry about the wrong thing. I looked at my watch. 12:41. I did not know, checking the time, that I had roughly 20 minutes left as simply Walt's widow in the eyes of that yard. Everything after would be different for all of us, in ways none of the 40 people eating brisket around me could yet imagine. And that's when it happened. Out past the fence on Live Oak Street, the noon heat already making the asphalt shimmer. A dark sedan I didn't recognize slowed down, signaled, politely, the way a driver signals when reading house numbers off a curb, turned in toward the long, unbroken line of pickups and minivans parked along my own fence. I set my fork down on the paper plate. Across the yard, still mid-laugh at something one of the uncles had said, Brooke Maddox went completely, visibly still. The sedan stopped behind the last pickup in line. For a long moment, nothing happened. The cornhole game 2 tables over kept thocking along. A baby fussed near the dessert table. A man laughed behind me at his own joke a second time. For a second, I thought it was nothing. A lost guest. Somebody's cousin, running late off the highway. Then the driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was in uniform. Not the everyday kind you see all over Belton. Soldiers from Fort Cavazos, buying groceries and fatigues because their shift just ended. This was the Army service uniform. Dark blue coat, trousers with the gold stripe down the leg, shoes polished enough to read fine print in. He settled his cap on his head with both hands. Square. Level. The exact motion I trained a generation of officers to make without thinking. He shut the car door without slamming it. He stood a moment by the fender, reading the yard, looking for the shape of the place, the way I once taught soldiers to read unfamiliar ground before walking into it. On his shoulder, catching green light through the pecan leaves, sat the silver oak leaf of a lieutenant colonel. The yard noticed him, the way still water notices a dropped stone. The awareness moved outward from the fence. The cornhole game stopped first. Then the men at the smoker turned, tongs still raised. Then the women at the dessert table. The teenagers lowered their phones an inch. Table by table, every relative Brooke had spent the spring gathering went quiet. They turned to watch a man in dress blues come through the gate. He carried a leather folder under his arm. He walked the way they train you to walk on a formal call, unhurried, heel and toe. He came up the slope of my own backyard. past the first table where my brother-in-law Gary half rose out of his chair, certain for a second that the visit concerned some old guard business of his own. The officer's gaze passed over Gary and did not stop. Past the second table, where two of Danny's friends from the plant sat up straighter on instinct, the way men do around a uniform. His gaze passed over them too, past Danny himself, my son, who had gone the color of skim milk. He set his beer down carefully on the arm of his chair, the exact motion of a man who has just understood the ground beneath him is not what he thought. The officer's eyes touched Danny for exactly as long as they touched everyone else, which is to say, not at all, and moved on, and Brooke stepped into his path. I will give her this, because it is true. She did not flinch from that uniform the way most civilians do. She had spent her whole life learning how to step in front of a moving situation and redirect it. A hostess's whole skill set. She put the smile back on, the one that had gone slightly rigid a moment before. She put out her hand. She angled her body to draw him gently into the party. Already deciding, I could see it happen on her face, that this was someone's plus one. A recruiter friend. A soldier who'd gotten his Saturdays confused. "Hi there," she said, bright, the butter still in her voice. "Can I help you find somebody? It's a private event today, just family, but you're so welcome to grab a plate if you—" He stopped walking. He looked at her hand. He did not take it. "Ma'am," he said, in a voice built to carry a field without ever sounding raised. "I'm looking for General Maddox." I watched the word land on her. There is a particular thing a face does when a word arrives it wasn't braced for. Brooke's smile didn't fall all at once. It froze, exactly where it was, every tooth still showing. Behind it, in her eyes, a fast, small calculation ran and came up with nothing. Because the only Maddox who had ever worn a uniform, in her whole understanding of this family, was Walt's own father, dead since the Carter administration. There was no general anywhere in her story, not in the guardianship petition, not in the version of this family she had spent a year rehearsing for a judge. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice had lost its butter. "There's no general here. This is just a family reunion. I think you might have the wrong house." "Live Oak Street," the officer said, not unkindly. He did not even glance at a paper. "Belton, this is the right house." Then he lifted his eyes past her, past the frozen smile, the butter-yellow sundress, across the whole turned staring yard to the far corner under the pecan tree where they had seated me, to the small plastic chair with a green dinosaur on the back, where a 72-year-old woman in a gray cardigan sat, hands folded, a paper plate of brisket cold in front of her. He found me there. I watched something move across his face. Small, professional. The jaw tightening a half-second before the rest of the body follows. He walked toward me, past Brooke, who turned her whole body to follow him, past the children's table, where two small cousins stared up with their mouths open. He stopped 4 feet from the dinosaur chair. His heels came together with a sound the soft grass mostly swallowed, but everyone heard anyway, the way you hear a sound your body recognizes before your ears finish processing it. He came to attention, and Lieutenant Colonel Ray Hammond, United States Army, raised his right hand to the brim of his cap. A salute so precise, so slow, so entirely correct, that 30 years of a soldier's whole career sat compressed inside that one held gesture. He said, into a yard gone utterly silent, "We need you now, General. It's the situation on Meridian. You could have heard a single pecan leaf come down. I want to tell you what it is to be saluted like that. It is not the thing most people assume. It does not puff a person up. It is closer to the opposite of pride. It is a weight. A man handing you back, all at once, the whole of what you spent decades earning. in front of every relative who spent the past year deciding you were nothing. And the only correct response to a weight like that is to carry it the way you always carried it before. So I set my plate down in the grass. I put both hands on the arms of a seat built for a 6-year-old. It sat low, and I am 72, and I will not pretend the motion was graceful. But I rose out of that dinosaur chair the same way I always have. The same way I rise out of every room that tries to seat me below my rank. And I returned Lieutenant Colonel Hammond's salute. My hand was steady. My hands have been steady in far worse rooms than a backyard in Belton, Texas. At ease, Colonel, I said. My voice did what his had done. It carried the length of the yard. You came a long way to find me. 3 times, ma'am, he said, dropping the salute. Something raw moved just under the discipline now. The specific strain of a liaison officer who has failed to raise a flag officer for 3 straight weeks. He knows exactly what that costs him with the people above his chain. We've been attempting contact since the 9th. Phone, 3 certified letters. We were beginning to think. He stopped himself mid-sentence. A well-trained man, deciding correctly not to finish that thought in a stranger's backyard. You were beginning to think something had happened to me, I said. Something did happen to me, Colonel. It simply was not the thing anyone was imagining. And for the first time since he'd come through my own side gate, I turned and looked directly at Brooke Maddox. She had not moved an inch. The smile was entirely gone now, fallen away completely. What remained underneath it was a woman running fast arithmetic and arriving at answers she did not want. Certified letters, since the 9th, to this address. To the mailbox by my own front gate. The mailbox she passed on foot nearly every day. The mailbox she had held a key to for 3 years. The letters came here, I said, to Hammond, though I said it watching her. All 3, you said. Somebody signed for each of them. Somebody did, ma'am. He opened the leather folder now, drew out a single sheet, a delivery confirmation, the small green card the Postal Service returns as proof. Even from where I stood, I could see the signature scrawled across it was small and slanted. It was not, this time, any kind of imitation of my own hand. Nobody had bothered to forge my name on a postal receipt. Why would they trouble themselves? It was only junk mail to them. An irritation. Correspondence for a woman who was not going to remain a legal person for very much longer. Read me the name on the card, Colonel, I said. He glanced at it. He is a courteous man, and I could see he did not particularly want to read a private signature aloud at a family gathering. But I had asked him too, in the voice. And the voice is not a thing people argue with once they've heard it in full. It is signed, he said, B. Maddox. And the entire yard turned. Every one of the 40-some relatives Brooke had spent the spring assembling, almost in unison, away from the colonel and toward her. Brooke found her footing the way a person finds a familiar step in the dark, by instinct, without looking. I will give her this too, one last time, because it is true. She did not run. She rallied. She lifted her chin, and she did the only thing left in her playbook. The exact thing she had spent the afternoon building toward. She laughed, light, social, practiced. She pressed one hand flat against her own chest. She turned to face the yard, the cousins she had coached all spring, the aunts whose elbows she had touched all morning, and she said, warm, sad, endlessly reasonable, okay, everybody, honestly, this is exactly what I've been afraid of. She shook her head, sorrowful, loving. She gets a man out here in a costume, telling a story about generals and Pentagon business. You can all see it now, can't you? Bless her heart. This is exactly what it's been like at home. This is why we filed. She can't always tell what's real anymore. She imagines things. She imagines she is a general, I said. I didn't mean, Brooke started. Say it, I said. Finish the sentence. Tell this man to his face in his own uniform. Tell him the army drove a government car to Belton on a Saturday just to play along with an old woman's confusion. I stood there in my cardigan, on my own grass. I let my voice carry the way it was trained to carry decades ago, and has never once forgotten how. I don't get loud, Brooke. I never have. Walt used to tell people I was the quietest, dangerous person he ever met. I don't get loud. I get accurate. For a moment, nobody in that yard moved at all. Lieutenant Colonel Hammond had stepped back half a pace. The posture of a professional who understands the action has passed out of his hands. He stood with his hands folded near the gate, watching. Danny had not risen from his chair. He was staring at the grass between his own shoes, as though it might offer him a different Saturday to stand inside. I want to be plain about what was happening in me, in that silence, because it is the part people ask me about most afterward. I was not enjoying it. I want that understood clearly. There is a version of this moment people imagine, where the wronged party stands in triumph, savoring it. That was never what I felt, not for 1 second, standing in that grass. What I felt, if I am honest, was closer to grief. I was watching my daughter-in-law, a woman I had genuinely loved for the better part of 2 decades. She was finishing it in real time, in front of everyone who had ever trusted her. The exact trap she had spent a year digging for someone else. That is when the gate creaked open a second time. An older man came through it slowly, unhurried, the way a person moves who has never once, in his professional life, needed to move faster than the facts required. He wore a brown suit, pressed for the occasion, and carried a leather portfolio gone soft at the corners with age. He stopped just inside the fence and took off his hat. Sam Pruitt looked out across that lawn. He had stood beside me at my husband's graveside. He had said perhaps 40 words to me across 3 years. At the woman in the butter-yellow dress. Mrs. Maddox, he said, in the same dry, unhurried voice he uses for every document that has ever mattered to him. I am glad I am not late. I believe there is a clause here everyone ought to hear. He did not raise his voice either, walking that lawn. He has spent 40 years in rooms where the loudest person eventually loses. He crossed the grass slowly, past the cornhole boards nobody was playing anymore, past the smoker nobody was tending, until he reached the nearest folding table. He set his portfolio down and opened it with 2 hands, the way you open something about to do serious work. Brooke watched him the way you watch a man begin loading a weapon you cannot yet see the size of. Sam, she said, and the warmth was still in her voice, but thinner now, the individual threads visible for the first time. Sam, this is family business. I appreciate you coming. I know you and Walt went back a long way, but this really isn't. It is trust business, Brooke, Sam said. And I am the trustee's attorney, so it is exactly my business. He drew a single document from the portfolio, blue-backed, folded in thirds, the way legal papers in this county have been folded for 100 years. He did not wave it. He laid it flat and smoothed it once with the side of his hand. Diane, do I have your permission to read this aloud? Read it, I said. He put on his glasses. Hammond had drifted to stand near the gate, hands folded, the posture of a man whose part in this scene has passed. 40 faces turned in toward the table. Danny had still not risen. He was watching the grass between his own shoes. This is the Maddox Family Trust, Sam said, executed and recorded in Bell County, Texas, in the spring of 2019. I drafted it myself, at Walt Maddox's own kitchen table. He was, and I want the record to reflect this, an unusually particular man about the wording. He turned a page. Article 2 conveys the real property on Live Oak Street, Belton, into the trust in full. Article 4 names the trustee, sole and exclusive, full authority over the entire corpus. He looked up over the rims of his glasses at Brooke. Diane Maddox, sole trustee since 2019. The yard was quiet enough now that I could hear the pecan leaves. I want everyone here to hold 2 dates in their heads, Sam said, because the whole afternoon lives in the gap between them. The house went into this trust in 2019. The home equity line that Brooke took out against it, the one that paid for, and here his eyes moved, just once, briefly, across the rental tent and the caterer's dishes. The bartender had stopped pretending not to listen. A number of things. Signed this past January, 2026, 7 years after the house stopped belonging to any individual person at all. That doesn't, Brooke began. You borrowed against a property, Sam said, and his voice did not rise, that the person signing did not own. Diane did not own this house, not as an individual, not since 2019. The trust owns it. Diane only holds it as trustee for the trust's benefit, and a trustee cannot pledge trust property without documented authority. There was no such authority, Brooke, not because of anything but the instrument you used to claim it. He drew a second page. One I had already seen, one that had kept me from sleeping 3 nights. This power of attorney, dated this past January, carries a signature the bank's own notary log cannot account for. Because Diane was not in that bank that day. Diane was in Houston, at MD Anderson, with me, in a waiting room while a doctor read her blood work aloud to the 2 of us. I watched Brooke's hand rise to her own throat. Not a gesture she chose, a reflex, a body looking for somewhere to put what her mind had only just understood. The signature on this is not hers, Sam said, setting the page down flat. I have 40 years of Diane Maddox's genuine signature in my own files. What is on this page is a drawing of it. You held my mail, I said. Quiet, into the quiet. It carried across that yard the way the colonel's voice had carried. That is the part I kept turning over, sitting in that little chair all morning. Not the guardianship petition. Not the doctor you paid to write 3 sentences about a woman he met for 9 minutes. The mail. The Army wrote to me 3 times, certified, a federal seal on every envelope, and you signed for each one, B. Maddox. You made certain those letters never reached me. Because a woman getting federal correspondence, her old rank printed beside her name, is not easy for a judge to declare incompetent. You knew that. You couldn't have it. So you let a government office believe something had happened to one of their own, rather than let me read my own mail. I was protecting you, she said, and it cracked down the middle. Diane, I was. Everyone here will tell you. You have been forgetful. I clocked your catering bill the moment I sat down in that chair, I said. Double what it cost you last year. I clocked the rental chairs, the bartender, the photographer wandering around getting candid shots of a family that's told everyone all spring it's scraping by. I clocked the new truck behind Danny's old one this morning. I have kept a ledger of one kind or another since before you were born, Brooke. I do not get loud. I get accurate. I have been accurate about this family for 3 years, while you told everyone I was slipping. The only thing I ever let slip was you. Walt asked me near the end to give you room enough to show this whole family exactly who you were. I gave you that room. Look what you built inside it. And then Danny stood up. He rose slowly, the way a much older man rises. His face was wet, and he made no move to wipe it. He did not look at his wife. He looked at me, standing beside the dinosaur chair in my cardigan. Mom, he said. His voice broke clean in half on the one syllable. I signed the guardianship petition. I need everybody here to hear me say it. I signed it. She told me it was to protect your money from people who might take advantage of you. She told me you'd thank us eventually. He pressed the heel of one hand against his mouth. He forced himself back under control. I didn't read it. God help me. I didn't read 4 pages about my own mother before I put my name under hers. He turned to Sam. Tell me what to do. Tell me how I undo this. You stop holding it up, I said, before Sam could answer. That's all of it, Danny. You simply stop. Here is what happened in the days after. Because a thing this size does not end in a backyard. It ends in offices, with people who carry case numbers instead of opinions. I am a woman who has always respected an office. Sam walked the recorded deed and the trust into the bank branch that Monday morning. He laid both on the desk of the loan officer, the same one who had accepted Brooke's paperwork the previous January without ever pulling a full chain of title. When a bank discovers its collateral is trust property, pledged under a forged power of attorney, it does not argue the point. It calls the loan. The full balance, $118,412, came due at once. Overnight, a line of credit against a house became a personal unsecured debt, belonging to Danny and Brooke alone, against money already gone into rented chafing dishes and a new truck and $4,000 of landscaping 2 streets over. The guardianship petition died in family court that same week. A judge does not maintain a filing declaring a woman incapable. Not in the same week, a Pentagon liaison office submits an affidavit, one that calls her judgment, in its own words, an ongoing asset of the United States government. The judge dismissed it from the bench. He apologized to me directly. I told him the system had done its job the moment the truth was finally allowed to reach it. The most generous sentence I have ever offered a man who nearly signed away my life on someone else's word. Adult Protective Services opened a file that same month. Not against me, for me. An elder financial exploitation review. The forged instrument. The diverted mail. 3 relatives who admitted, once asked directly, that Brooke had rehearsed specific phrases with them before the reunion. That review is not mine to finish, and it is not finished yet as I tell you this. It belongs now to people with badges and case files of their own. I handed over every page of my own ledger and let it go where it needed to go. Brooke carries this alone now. That was Walt's own quiet mercy, written years before he ever needed it. The trust was drawn tight enough. The only person who could fall through it was the one person who reached for something that had never been inside it. Danny is staying, for now, in the garage apartment behind my house. He brings me coffee most mornings. Neither of us says a great deal. I have found, at 72, that this particular kind of quiet is its own slow form of repair. The kind that does not photograph well and does not need to. I should tell you what brought Lieutenant Colonel Hammond down my street in the first place. It is not simply a device I invented to force open a family drama. It would be dishonest to leave it vague. The situation on Meridian, as he called it, concerned a consulting review connected to a base logistics contract, one I had helped design the original framework for years ago, back when I still wore the uniform in full. A newer contractor had proposed changes touching old operational language. Only a handful of retired officers still understood it well enough to certify as safe. My name had remained, without my knowledge, on a very short list of people the Army preferred to consult before certain decisions became final. It was not glamorous work. 3 afternoons reviewing documents at a folding table in a secure room, answering careful questions from younger officers. They called me ma'am more times in 3 hours than my own son had called me mom in 3 years. But it was real. It mattered to people whose names I will never know, and it was the reason a government office grew alarmed. After 3 weeks of silence, they sent a man in dress blues down my own street, rather than mail a fourth letter. I tell you this to be fair to Lieutenant Colonel Hammond. He did not arrive at that reunion as a plot device sent by fate to rescue an old woman from her family. He arrived doing his job, competently, the way I trained a generation of officers to do their jobs. The collision of his errand with Brooke's reunion was not destiny. It was simply what happens when one person spends weeks building a careful deception, and another person, entirely unconnected to it, is doing careful, patient work of her own. Walt did not believe in fate either. He believed most of what looks like a miracle is only two honest processes arriving at the same address on the same afternoon. Hammond stayed another 20 minutes after Sam finished reading the trust, standing near the gate, quietly professional. Before he left, he came back to where I stood. "Ma'am, for what it's worth," he said, low. "Just for me, I did not expect any of that." He glanced once toward Brooke, who had sat down heavily in one of the good gray chairs by then, her face in her hands. Several relatives stood at a careful distance around her, the way people stand near something that might still be dangerous. I've delivered a lot of messages in my career, never one that landed in the middle of quite so much else. "Most important things arrive in the middle of something else, Colonel," I told him. "That is usually how you know they matter." He smiled at that, briefly. The first unguarded expression I had seen on his face since he came through my gate. Then he squared his cap again. He thanked me for my continued service, in a phrase so formal it nearly made me laugh. Then he walked back to his government sedan. He drove off down Live Oak Street the same unhurried way he arrived, leaving 40 relatives standing in a yard that no longer felt at all like the one they'd woken up inside that morning. The weeks after the reunion were quieter than I expected. I had imagined, in the days leading up to that Saturday, that the reckoning, once it finally arrived, would feel enormous. That something in the air of Belton itself would shift. What actually happened was smaller and slower, and I think truer to how real consequences unfold. Certified letters went out, phone calls were returned, or were not. A caseworker from Adult Protective Services came to my kitchen table twice, a patient young woman named Faith, who took careful notes and thanked me both times for keeping such an orderly file, which made me think, not for the first time, a life spent keeping orderly files eventually pays a person back in ways she cannot predict. Renee, my cousin, called me 3 weeks after the reunion, crying to apologize. She told me Brooke had coached her back in the spring to mention twice at any gathering that I seemed to be repeating myself. Repetition, Brooke had told her, was one of the things a judge liked to hear about. Renee believed she was helping. I told her I understood, and I mostly did. Brooke's particular skill, the one that had frightened me most once I finally saw it, was never cruelty exactly. It was her genuine talent for making complicity feel, to the people she recruited into it, like an act of love. My granddaughter Ashley, the one who had once asked gently if I'd been feeling like myself, drove up from Austin 2 weekends later. She sat with me on my own back porch most of an afternoon. She cried harder than Renee had. She was young enough still to believe family loyalty and moral clarity were the same instinct. Old enough now to understand that sometimes they are not. Choosing between them is one of the harder things a person is asked to do. I told her what I have come to believe, that loyalty to a person and loyalty to the truth about that person are not always the same debt. that a person can love someone completely and still refuse to lie for them. That refusal is not a betrayal of love. It is very often the only form love has left, once the lying has already begun. Sam Pruitt came by the house himself, twice in the weeks after. Once with papers needing my signature for the fraud referral. Once for no particular reason, he said, beyond checking that an old friend's widow was managing all right on her own. On that second visit, he sat with me at the kitchen table, the one Walt and I ate every meal of our married life at. He told me something I hadn't known. Walt had come to him, back in the fall of 2019, not from any specific suspicion about Brooke at that early date. He'd simply gotten it into his head. Watching her operate at a 4th of July barbecue that year, a woman with her particular gifts, applied without a conscience attached, could do enormous damage to a family someday, and that the damage would most likely fall hardest on whichever Maddox had the least power in the room when it happened. Walt had assumed, Sam told me, that person would eventually be me. Once he was gone, and I was old and alone, and easiest to underestimate. He saw it coming 4 years out, Sam said, shaking his head slowly. I told him at the time he was being paranoid about a woman who brought potato salad to every gathering. He told me paranoid people build fences before the storm, not during it. Sam looked at me over his glasses, the way he does when he's about to say something he's clearly been holding on to. He loved you in a very specific way, Diane. Not the way people write about in cards. The way an engineer loves a bridge he built. He wanted to know it would hold weight long after he stopped being able to check on it himself. I did not cry when Sam told me that. I came close, sitting at that table. I cried later, alone, that same night, the third of the 4 times I've cried as an adult. There is a particular kind of grief that only arrives once you finally understand the full size of what you were loved by. Months or years after the person doing the loving is already gone and cannot see your face when you finally understand it. Brooke did not go to prison. Some listeners want a harder ending than the one life actually handed us. I've never found much use for pretending a story ended more dramatically than it did. The fraud review, once it finished its slow course, resulted in a civil judgment against her personally. The full balance of the home equity line, plus penalties, garnished in small increments from whatever income she manages to find. The county attorney reviewed the forged power of attorney for criminal charges and declined to prosecute, citing my own stated preference. I'd already gotten everything I needed from that woman. The truth, spoken plainly, in front of everyone she'd spent a year deceiving. I did not need her in a cell to feel the ledger had balanced. Walt would have understood that distinction. He always said a debt collected in full is a debt collected, whether or not the person paying it also suffers for it. Danny and Brooke separated 4 months after the reunion. I take no pleasure in reporting it. It was not my doing, not directly. It was, from what Danny has told me since, simply the weight of what he could no longer unsee. Once, in front of 40 relatives, he'd said the words I signed it out loud with his own mouth. He moved into my garage apartment that same week. He's been there since, working, paying down his half of the judgment, in a way Sam tells me is unusually diligent for a man his age. Some evenings he comes into the main house and sits with me at the kitchen table. We do not talk about Brooke. We do not talk very much about anything of consequence. I've decided that is not a failure between us. It is simply what repair looks like at the beginning, before either person quite trusts the other's silence yet. That evening, once the last relatives had gone and the caterer's crew had folded up the tent, I walked back out into my own yard, alone. The grass was flattened in patches where 40 people had stood and argued and gone silent. The pecans hung heavy and green overhead, indifferent to all of it, the way trees generally are to what happens underneath them. I found the small plastic chair with the green dinosaur on the back, still sitting exactly where Brooke had placed it that morning. I picked it up. I folded it closed. I carried it to the back door and leaned it against the frame. Then I went inside. I sat down at the kitchen table Walt and I built our whole marriage around. I opened his letter one more time. I read the last line by the kitchen light, alone, the way he had always known somehow that I eventually would.